Hey everybody, Relay here. Welcome to another segment of Flop or Not, where I determine if a game flops or if it doesn't. Now, this is a game that I've wanted to do for a while, and it's called Armored Core 6: Fires of Rubicon. I've been waiting till I've gotten like a more fuller experience with it, so I've played multiple playthroughs of the story now, and I got a bit more of a complete picture, so I'm going to weigh in what I think about the game and give you a bit more of an in-depth look into the game to decide if maybe you want to get the game or if you don't want to get the game. So for those of you who aren't aware, Armored Core 6 is a mech shooter game developed by FromSoft and published by Bandai Namco. So it follows the kind of narrative that they take with most of their Dark Souls games. So the story is a little bit more obscure and is set in more of a post-apocalyptic scenario. So like always, I'm going to dive into this in a few different subcategories and we'll tackle them one by one. Starting with the environment. So the first thing I want people to know is that Armored Core 6 is not open world. I think ever since Elden Ring, people would like to expect more open world games, considering how massively open world Elden Ring was. And I think going forward, it is actually better for them to add some variety. So Armored Core has always been more mission based, in a sense where when you launch on a mission, you can explore within the confines of that mission, but you can't go and just do whatever you want. Obviously, you're restricted by barriers. Even though you're restricted by those barriers, you can still find very useful equipment and certain logs that give you a more detailed idea of the overall story. That being said, the maps themselves during the missions vary, and you'll find multiple different environments throughout the missions you play. So you'll find yourself in, snowy areas. You'll find yourselves in abandoned derelict cities, caverns, desert areas, etc. While the game doesn't have the greatest graphics of all time, and I've always said that graphics don't really mean much into how great a game is, I do still find the picture to be quite nice. And keep in mind that a lot of the elements in the map are also quite destructible. In the PvP aspect of things, there are maps, but they're all derivative from the story missions that you kind of go through. So they're basically just certain sectioned off areas in missions that you go through in the story. Moving on to the story aspect of things. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a FromSoft game, meaning that the story is pretty obscure. It's not easy to get a general idea of what the overall story is, but without spoiling it, I'll give you the basic rundown. The story takes place in a post-apocalyptic setting, a typical FromSoft formula, but there is all of a sudden a big interest in this planet called Rubicon because there is a certain valuable asset called coral, which is kind of flourishing on that planet. And so you play as an independent mercenary called C4621, who is a 4th generation augmented human. Now, an augmented human is just a being that has increased potential through like surgical enhancement. So basically someone who has increased mental and physical capabilities. Now, as a mercenary, your main goal is to just essentially follow whatever missions are given to you by your handler. In this case, handler Walter, who's another primary protagonist, some might say, in the story. Somewhere along the line, you end up making contact with Coral, and there's a new character that comes into play called Air. And Air is like almost acts as a handler, but she's not a handler. However, in order to not make things too complicated, we'll say that she's kind of like a handler. So she can also give you missions from the Rubicon Liberation Front, and from there you'll notice that you can choose different paths to how the story's outcome plays out. And these are done by playing what are called decision missions. So these missions directly influence the outcome of future missions and how the enemy ACs and the enemy corporations will see you. So after you beat the game the first time, you'll have a chance to play different missions and take different paths to get a different ending, and that applies for NG+, NG+2, etc. That being said, surprisingly, the replayability value, which I wasn't expecting, is actually quite high, because I feel like every new playthrough there was a new mission or a different path that I could take which would lead to a different outcome, which is not something you see super often in a lot of games nowadays, and it's quite refreshing. Moving on now to the battle mechanics, which is a primary component of this game, and if not the largest factor in this game. So your mech is incredibly customizable in this game, from all kinds of equipment parts, from weapons to shoulder weapons, heads, torsos, arms, legs, even down to your generator and your boosters. Everything can be used to your advantage if you tweak it in a certain way. There's even something called OS tuning, which gives you like a hidden ability where you can deploy like a pulse barrier for a few seconds, or create like an EMP charge of some sort. And it even goes all the way down to decals and paint jobs for those of you who want to get really creative. The emblem system in this game is fun. It's kind of like a throwback to the goofier days of Call of Duty, where you can make your emblem to be whatever you want it to be. So that's kind of nice customization wise for PvP especially. With this large amount of customization, you can really do any build you want and test it out to see if it works. And if it doesn't, then you just go back to the garage and build something else. It's really sweet because you can also save certain presets of builds that you've made, quickly switch between them, and have them ready at a moment's notice. While we're on the subject of preset builds, there's also the arena, which is like a mock PvP but using NPCs, where you're placed against an enemy AI and you have to beat their armored core. Once you do, oftentimes you'll get their blueprint and their emblem, which you can then try out for yourself and see if that's a build you might like trying. I myself played the entire 3 playthroughs as a lightweight character, which has its benefits but also has its downsides. I found it very advantageous against one of the first real bosses of the game, which were nerfed just recently in a patch, but is still a tough boss. So Baltius was a game breaker for a lot of people. To me, it wasn't that hard because I knew you could always go back and customize, but for some people it's actually quite difficult of a boss. The caveat was that he moved quite a bit around the map and he could move long distances, but also that he had a pulsed shield constantly around him, and you'd have to destroy that shield before you are able to deal any real damage on him. Now, some people were just able to brute force it through just, sheer perseverance, but for others, the smarter option oftentimes is to go back to the garage and recustomize. So there's pulse shields, there's also pulse weapons, and pulse technology is good at canceling itself out. So sometimes it's worth switching into a pulse weapon to destroy that barrier very quickly and then go in and deal some real damage on him with the barrier being down. There's just little things like that you can kind of work around bosses that make it really nice, and it makes it almost less hard in a way that they give you the customization option when you die to go back to the garage and select a different AC or swap out your parts, and it kind of gives you that element of okay, I'm not completely screwed, I can still go back and rearrange my mech and try a different combination. So you don't lose all hope when you lose against a boss time and time again, because you can customize your AC to be better adapted for that battle. So having gone over all that, it's pretty clear that customization plays very much into a large part of Armored Core 6's gameplay, and the battle mechanics play around what build you can make and what kind of enemy you're against, really. Most enemies don't have a huge particular weakness, but you'll find that many pieces of equipment work better against certain enemies just because of their situation, whether they're faster, slower moving, if they have a shield, or if they're more aggressive up close. You'll find that certain variants to your own equipment will make up for a big difference in difficulty, and you should be able to eventually, with time and experimentation, kill the boss. Now, because we just kind of touched on it, I'm going to go back to the difficulty portion. So how difficult is Armored Core 6? I'd say it's maybe a bit more difficult than your average game, but by no means is it impossible. Because of the amount of customization the game gives you and allows you to do, you should find a workaround for almost every enemy you encounter, or every AC or every boss you encounter. It comes down to being able to kind of play around with your mech to the point where you either find a very strong combination, or you beef your AC up. Maybe you want more defense, more AP, so you equip certain armor parts, which we'll talk about a bit later. There's so much customization that the difficulty can be mitigated with different AC builds, and the only thing is that sometimes it takes a bit of time to figure out what build works best for what boss, and you just go from there. So if I had to rate the difficulty, I would say that it's not trivial, but to say that it's insane would be a little bit extra. I'd say it's a difficult game, a hard game. Moderately hard, not insanely hard, but difficult to the point where you may struggle on certain parts, especially if you haven't considered experimenting with your AC yet. But nothing more than that. So moving on to the part where this game shines in the customization of the equipment and the gear that you can swap out in your mech. There's a lot of different categories, so we'll start with the weapons. So with the two primary main left and right hand weapons, you can have like an endless variety, really. There's kinetic rifles and SMGs. There's shotguns for close range encounters. There's swords, so plasma sword, pulse sword. There's There's handheld rocket launchers and grenade launchers, as well as stun guns and a stun baton, which build up like an EMP effect or an electric discharge effect on the enemy. There are also pistols and laser pistols. Laser weapons, oftentimes you can charge them up to produce a larger amount of damage over time while charged, and these weapons will likely be picked based on your overall character build, you know, how lightweight your AC is, or if it's the opposite, if it's heavyweight. Your influence on weaponry will sometimes be based on what kind of overall mech that you build. So moving on to the shoulder weapons, it's kind of more of the same. It has all the elements as the main right and left hand weapons, but they're often used for either a pulse shield that you can temporarily deploy, or rocket launchers, laser cannons that are mounted over the shoulder, which can deal a large amount of damage. But they can also be used for interchangeably, swapping out between your left and right hand weapons, kind of like a reserve weapon almost, that you can swap out. And this is an ability that you can acquire through OST tuning chips, which are acquired in the arena. So for both weapons and different AC body parts, you have two governing factors which determine what you can equip to your AC. So the first one being equipment load, so your overall weight, and the other being your energy load, so how much energy you can spend based on your parts. So for example, laser weapons take out quite a bit of energy, as well as certain body parts. They'll be quite a bit more expensive on energy. So you have to be below a certain threshold, otherwise you won't be able to build your AC. So generally what governs energy would be the generator customization portion, and what governs load will be your legs. So there are multiple different pairs of legs. Now that we're into it, I may as well talk about it. The legs determine how mobile you are, but also how much AP you have and how much weight you can hold. So having a tank base, for example, is a unit that's going to have much more AP, so much more health, and probably much more defensive performance, but it will come at a cost of mobility. So you can't really fly generally as high as you would, or maybe as fast as you would as other mechs, but it comes at a trade-off of health. So with the tank base, you can obviously equip more heavier weaponry, and you'll also have no movement penalty from firing this weaponry. Whereas with a lightweight build, for example, if I were to use like heavier shoulder cannons, sometimes you'll notice your AC has to kind of stabilize itself after shooting, which interrupts your movement. So oftentimes lightweight builds will want to stick with more lightweight equipment to kind of suit their mobility advantage. That being said, in the legs portion, there are also reverse joint legs, which will kind of allow you to hop around and change your playstyle to a bit more of movement-based playstyle, to kind of be always in movement, and you can jump around and change directions very quickly. There's also the tetra legs or quad legs, which are suited for an aerial playstyle, so you can stay hovering in the air for quite a long duration, and you can take advantage of the higher point of view to see what's going on in the battlefield to your advantage. Oftentimes you equip that with a missile launcher, and you can kind of flank people from above. Whereas there are medium legs, which are just general use. You can use them for whatever kind of build. And there are lightweight legs, which can't hold a lot of weight, so you have to be careful with what you're putting on your AC if you decide to go with a lightweight build, because you're going to exceed that weight limit very quickly. But the advantage of having lightweight legs is that you can move a lot faster, and I kind of like that playstyle, so that's the kind of AC that I built around. In the heads portion, the heads just influence more of the same, so your AP, your defensive performance, and your attitude stability. So the attitude stability is like your stagger bar, if I'm not mistaken. So the higher your attitude stability, the harder it is to stagger you. And your system recovery is also your ability to recover after being staggered. So these are certain elements you're going to want to play with in order to determine what kind of build is best for you and what you're comfortable with in terms of compromises. When we get to the torsos, you'll notice that again, certain torsos are better for defensive performance and AP, whereas other ones are lighter and better for mobility. But you'll also notice that it also has a different value called generator output adjustment, which basically gives you the ability to have an increased amount of energy load, so you can equip more energy costing weapons with that build. Now that we're finally almost done with the parts, I'm getting to the arms now. So the arms have two different values that you don't see on anything else. Number one being arms load limit, which basically just tells you how heavy of weapons you can equip, and the firearm specialization, which to my knowledge acts as an accuracy booster. So the higher your firearm specialization, the more accurate you'll be, and the more accurate your auto tracking will be. Moving on from the arms, we also have boosters. So different boosters also suit your faster playstyles. Some boosters are faster at just overall quickly shifting side to side or up and down or back and forth. Some of them are faster with their assault boost, which is a mechanic in this game that allows you to go very quickly and can allow you to kick an enemy if you have that unlocked in your OST. But there are also boosters for heavier units and units that want to stay in the air for a bit longer, that don't really care too much about acceleration. Again, lots of variety here. Moving on to the FCS, or Fire Control System. There are different fire control systems that allow you to tweak your mech for either close range combat, medium range combat, or long range combat, and these you can play around with based on your playstyle. There are some that are going to be better for medium range, there are some that are going to be better for long range, and some that'll be better for close range. So just play around with what you like and go from there. So is Armored Core 6 a flop or not? I can confidently say that it is the complete opposite of a flop. Armored Core 6 is an incredible game and has surprisingly high replayability value after even beating the game twice. The PvP is still alive even a month after I've seen just as many rooms and just as many people in PvP, and that's what makes this game so great. I think it'll have lots of support even in the years to come with the PvP, because people are so competitive and there's so many different ways that you can customize your mech and really get the most fun out of the game through customization. And I will say that the story, after beating it 3 times, is a much more fully painted picture towards the end of the 3rd time around. As obscure as FromSoft games usually are, you do get a lot of information from reading the logs, but they're not required to just understand the few endings that you have when playing this game. So if you have any questions or comments about anything in this video, I will be more than glad to answer any questions or comments. And yeah, take her easy.